All right, today we're going to dive into one of the most legendary showdowns on the high seas. We're talking about the Battle of Trafalgar.
So, picture this. It's October 1805. The entire fate of Europe is pretty much hanging by a thread. You've got Napoleon Bonaparte, the guy who's basically conquered the entire continent, and he's got his sights set on the final prize, Great Britain. But there's just one tiny little problem. He's got to cross the English Channel. And the sea? Well, the sea belongs to the Royal Navy. And that right there is where our story really kicks off. Okay, so to really get what's going on at Trafalgar, you've got to understand the bigger picture, the whole strategic chessboard. And honestly, it's a classic matchup, the elephant versus the whale.
So on one side, you've got Napoleon's French Empire. On land, they are the superpower, no question. His army, the Grande Armée, is the most feared fighting machine in all of Europe. But then, on the other side, you have the British Empire. Their power wasn't in legions of soldiers, but in the wooden walls of the Royal Navy. Britain absolutely owned the seas, and they used that power to slap this punishing blockade on France, which basically choked their trade, and crucially kept Napoleon's ships stuck in their ports.
And really, the whole thing boils down to one simple fact. For Napoleon's grand invasion of Britain to even have a chance, he needed to control the English Channel. He didn't even need it for long, maybe just a few days. That was it. That was the entire ballgame. Neutralize the Royal Navy, get your army across. Simple, right? But you know, these huge historical moments aren't just about armies and navies. Let's get to the human element here, because this epic conflict, it really boils down to the two guys in charge. It's a total duel of nerve, of experience, and yeah, of pure tactical genius.
So, for the British, you've got Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. The man was already a living legend at this point, and leading the combined French and Spanish fleet, that's Vice Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve. These are the two guys whose choices are about to decide everything.
And man, what a contrast between these two. Nelson's got this band of brothers, a super experienced, well-drilled team of captains and sailors. He's bold, he's confident, and he's kind of famous for just throwing out the rulebook. Villeneuve, well, he's a different story. He's basically haunted by the fact that Nelson had already beaten him before. So he's hesitant, he's cautious, and his crews, they're rusty. They've been stuck in port for years thanks to that British blockade. And let me tell you, this difference in leadership, it's going to be absolutely critical.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If you just look at the raw numbers, the stats, you see something pretty startling. Nelson was actually outnumbered and outgunned. The combined Franco-Spanish fleet had more of those massive battleships, the ships of the line. They had nearly twice the number of sailors and way more cannons. Seriously, on paper, this was Villeneuve's fight to lose.
So you might be asking, how did they all end up here, off the coast of Spain? Well, this battle is the climax of a huge, months-long game of cat and mouse that stretched across the entire Atlantic Ocean.
Napoleon's plan was, it was incredibly ambitious. It was a Hail Mary, really. He ordered his fleets to bust out of all their blockaded ports, sail all the way across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, link up, and then race back to Europe as one gigantic, unstoppable armada. The whole point? Create a fleet so massive it could just steamroll the Royal Navy in the English Channel, and, boom, clear the path for his invasion.
And the chase that followed was just immense. It's hard to even wrap your head around the scale of it. Villeneuve makes a break for it, and Nelson is right on his tail, chasing him from the Mediterranean all the way to the West Indies and then all the way back. For months, it was just this relentless pursuit across thousands and thousands of miles of open ocean. But then, we get to the turning point. After a pretty small, indecisive skirmish on his way back to Europe, Villeneuve just loses his nerve. He gets spooked, thinks Nelson is breathing down his neck, and he disobeys Napoleon's direct orders. Instead of sailing north to the Channel like he was supposed to, he retreats south and basically traps his entire fleet in the port of Cadiz in Spain. And with that one decision, Napoleon's grand plan to invade Britain was completely, totally dead in the water. Okay, so Villeneuve might be trapped, but remember, he still has the bigger fleet. He's got the numbers. So how on earth does Nelson plan to win against those kinds of odds? Well, this is where we get to his tactical masterstroke, the thing that became legendary, the Nelson touch.
All right, first, you got to understand how things were supposed to be done back then. For more than a century, naval battles were pretty formal. You'd have two fleets form up in these long, perfect parallel lines. Then they'd sail past each other, firing their cannons broadside. It was all very orderly, very controlled, but it almost never resulted in a knockout blow.
a really decisive victory.
So that was the puzzle Nelson had to solve. How do you take your smaller fleet and not just win, but completely annihilate a bigger enemy who's expecting that same old conventional fight? How do you force the kind of chaotic, decisive battle that the old rulebook was basically designed to prevent?
And his answer was just pure genius. He was basically going to tear up the rulebook and throw it overboard. Instead of that neat parallel line, he was going to attack in 2 columns, sailing straight at the enemy line perpendicular. The plan was to punch right through their center and their rear, just shatter their formation completely. This would turn that orderly dance into a chaotic, ship-to-ship brawl, a free-for-all, which is exactly where he knew his better-trained, more experienced crews would dominate. Because in a chaotic fight like that, it all comes down to who can reload faster, who can shoot more accurately, and who can handle their ship better under insane pressure. And Nelson was betting on his men.
And that's pretty much exactly what went down off Cape Trafalgar. Nelson's whole strategy could be summed up pretty simply. Forget the neat lines, get in close, and create total, controlled chaos.
So, it's just before noon, 11:45 a.m. on October 21st. His ships are sailing slowly, deliberately, right towards the enemy line. And at that moment, Nelson orders a signal to be flown from his flagship, the HMS Victory. It's a message that would become one of the most famous phrases in British history.
Now, you have to understand that this was the moment of insane risk. As Nelson's 2 columns plowed ahead, his leading ships were just sitting ducks. They were getting hammered by the full broadside firepower of the enemy. And for almost an hour, ships like the HMS Victory and the Royal Sovereign had to just soak up this storm of cannonballs without being able to fire a single shot back. It was an unbelievable gamble, and it all depended on the idea that the enemy's gunnery wouldn't be good enough to stop them before they broke the line. But the gamble paid off. The British columns smashed right through the enemy line, and the chaotic brawl Nelson wanted was on. But then, at the absolute height of the battle, when his flagship, the Victory, is locked in this vicious, brutal fight with the French ship Red Daube, a French marksman perched high up in the rigging takes aim. A single musket ball hits Nelson. The architect of this incredible victory was down, mortally wounded. You know, the story goes that Nelson lived just long enough to hear that he'd won his great decisive victory. So let's talk about what happened next, the aftermath, and the truly incredible legacy of that single day. The final numbers are just staggering. I mean, look at this. The British didn't lose a single ship, not one. The Franco-Spanish fleet, they lost 18 ships, either captured or just obliterated. And the casualty figures, they tell the real story. It was almost a 10-to-1 kill ratio. This was, without a doubt, one of the most lopsided victories in the entire history of naval warfare.
And the long-term impact? It was absolutely immense. See, Trafalgar wasn't just another battle. It was a defining moment. It put a permanent end to Napoleon's dream of ever invading Britain. And it cemented British naval supremacy for the next 100 years, a whole century that would eventually be called the Pax Britannica, the British peace. And of course, Nelson, the man who risked it all on a crazy, unorthodox plan, was immortalized as one of Britain's greatest heroes.
Which brings us to one last big question. When you think about the massive strategic impact, the sheer tactical genius, and the unbelievable scale of the victory, against all odds, could Trafalgar be called the single most decisive naval battle in all of history? It's a heck of a question, and one that historians still love to debate.